A farmer knocks down a giant termite mound, thinking it's just an obstacle on his land. But when the clay collapses, he realizes this isn't just a discovery. It's a secret that's been buried for 70 years. Watch until the end to find out how it all ends. Subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. Comment below. What would you do in his place? And where are you watching from? The morning heat of Queensland rose early, thick and dry, drawing the scent of dust and sun-baked eucalyptus through the open windows of Leo Hargreaves's kitchen. His coffee had long gone cold beside a pile of unpaid bills, the red stamps bleeding through the paper like old wounds. A letter from the bank lay on top, its tone polite but merciless. He ran his thumb across the photograph of his late father propped against the salt shaker. The man's weathered smile looked as though it belonged to another era entirely, one where men still believed hard work could fix anything. On the back of the photo, written in fading pencil, was a line Leo had read 100 times before. Don't dig deeper than you need to. He pushed the picture aside and folded the letter. The farm, dry and struggling for years, had nothing left to give. If he couldn't sell enough cattle or clear that eastern paddock, the bank would take it all. So when the local council offered a small subsidy to reclaim overgrown land, Leo decided to start there. The old paddock had been abandoned since before he was born, its boundaries marked by rusted fences and thorny scrub. And in its center, rising like a forgotten monument, stood the thing everyone in the district knew, the giant termite mound. It had towered there for decades, gray and ridged like a fossilized castle almost 4 meters high. Some said lightning had struck it once, and the termites rebuilt it exactly the same, as if following an ancient blueprint. Others swore it hummed on hot nights, a low vibration you could feel through your boots. The locals, half joking, called it the cathedral. Leo called it an obstacle. The ground around it was rich and used, and if he wanted to seed new pasture, the mound had to go. He climbed into his aging Komatsu excavator just as the sun broke over the ridge. The machine groaned to life, coughing smoke. The tracks bit into the earth, and the slow rumble echoed through the scrub as he pushed forward. Halfway down the trail, an old figure waved from a fence line. It was Mabel, Auntie May to everyone around, the last of the old settlers and the keeper of every ghost story within 50 miles. "Morning, Leo," she called, her voice dry but strong. "You heading for the cathedral?" "That's right," he shouted back, wiping sweat from his forehead. Tummock came down. May frowned, setting her enamel mug on a post. "That thing's older than you and me put together. Leave it be, love. Termites build where the ground's solid, and not everything buried needs daylight." Leo laughed politely. "You sound like my dad." "I should. He told me the same thing once," she said, then sprinkled a pinch of salt into the dirt. "For luck if you're going to ignore the living and the dead alike." He promised to be careful, then rumbled off. The air grew thicker as he approached the paddock. The mound loomed between twisted gums, its surface hard and shiny in places, almost metallic under the sunlight. He circled it slowly, studying its shape. The thing was enormous, nearly 12 feet tall, and just as wide at the base. Its color wasn't like any termite mound he'd seen before. It was darker, layered with compacted clay and strange flecks of reddish stone. He positioned the excavator and tested the ground with the bucket. It was firm, no sign of sinkholes. The local pest control officer had warned him that these ancient mounds sometimes formed above soft ground, but Leo trusted his instincts. He dropped the bucket and the first bite of clay came away in a thunderous crack. Dust exploded into the air, coating the windshield. He hit it again, and the mound shuddered like something alive. The hardened surface broke away in heavy slabs, revealing a maze of tunnels inside intricate chambers, hollow towers, a perfect city sculpted in miniature. For a strange moment, he felt guilty, like he was destroying a work of art. 20 minutes in, he was sweating through his shirt. The excavator's arm tore into the mound's core, and the structure groaned, a deep internal sound like air escaping a cave. Then, with a sharp metallic clink, the bucket hit something solid. The vibration ran up the boom and into his arms. He stopped the engine. The air was still. Only the ticking of cooling metal broke the silence. Leo climbed down, boots crunching over broken clay. He knelt beside the cavity. The mound's interior wasn't empty. It was sitting on something. He brushed aside dirt with his gloves, expecting a buried rock or rusted drum, but instead his hand struck smooth metal, a curve. He scraped harder, revealing the rim of a circular plate, heavy and perfectly shaped. Around its edge, faint lettering emerged beneath the grime. He leaned closer, heart thumping. The words, though half eroded, were unmistakable. Property of the Commonwealth, do not open. Beneath that, stamped in smaller text, Site B, 1953. What the hell? He muttered, tracing the engraving. The steel felt cold, unnaturally so, even in the heat. He dug deeper around the edge until he uncovered what looked like a handle bolted shut with two rusted latches. It wasn't just a plate. It was a hatch. The soil around it had settled hard as concrete. No wonder the termites had chosen it. They'd built their empire right on top of a buried bunker. For a long minute, he stood there, dirt streaking his arms, staring at the sealed entrance. A bunker meant one of two things: war or secrets. The older farmers had once talked about hidden shelters built during the war when everyone feared the Japanese invasion. But those were closer to the coast. This far inland, it didn't make sense. He fetched a crowbar from the cab and wedged it beneath the handle. The latches fought him with the stubbornness of time, then finally snapped loose. The hatch creaked open with a puff of stale metallic air. A ladder descended into darkness. He shone his flashlight down the hole. The beam revealed steel walls, a narrow corridor, and something that looked like a switchboard below. His father's voice echoed in memory. Don't dig deeper than you need to. Leo swallowed the thought. Curiosity outweighed fear. He tied the flashlight to his wrist and descended the ladder. The metal rungs were slick with rust, his boots ringing with each step. The air cooled rapidly, damp and earthy, carrying a faint scent of oil and mold. At the bottom, he stepped into a small chamber lined with flaking paint. Pipes ran along the ceiling marked with faded arrows and numbers. He clicked the flashlight across the room. There was an old fuse box labeled Warning 10V, a stack of empty crates, and half buried in silt a broken Geiger counter. On a nearby shelf lay a leather-bound notebook, its cover warped but intact. He brushed it open. Columns of names, dates, and times written in careful blue ink. At the top, the header read, Duty Log, Site B. He flipped a few pages until the entry stopped in the middle of 1958. The last note scribbled hastily chilled him. Evacuation complete. Lockdown ordered. No confirmation from HQ. The beam of his flashlight caught something glinting in the corner. A set of metal boxes sealed and stamped with thick red ink. Classified material. Handle with care. One box was labeled Project Terra Depth. The name meant nothing to him, but the military precision of it. Capital letters, coded numbers made his stomach tighten. He crouched, brushed away dust, and noticed a small camera lying nearby, a folding Kodak wrapped in a cracked leather case. When he opened it, an unexposed roll of film still sat inside. A faint sound made him freeze, a hum. Electrical or alive, he couldn't tell. Then, as his fingers grazed the fuse box, something sparked. A light overhead flickered, weak but steady, illuminating the chamber in a dull yellow glow. For the first time, he saw the true size of the space. Steel walls reinforced with riveted panels, a tunnel leading farther underground, and a heavy door at the far end stenciled breach chamber. He moved toward it slowly, the beam trembling. The silence was oppressive, thick with the weight of years. When he reached the door, he laid a hand on its surface. The metal was colder here, almost vibrating. The latch wouldn't move. He pressed his ear against it, hearing nothing but the hollow whisper of his own breathing. Behind him, the fuse box began to buzz. Then, without warning, a deep siren burst through the corridor, an ancient alarm, metallic and harsh. Leo stumbled back, heart hammering. Dust rained from the ceiling as the light above him pulsed red. He clambered up the ladder, coughing, pushing the hatch open with desperate strength. When he reached the surface, he froze. Across the paddock, just beyond the tree line, headlights burned through the twilight. An engine idled softly. He couldn't make out who was inside, but the vehicle wasn't local. It was large, dark, and government black. Leo killed his flashlight and crouched behind the ruined mound, his chest heaving. The siren below died out, leaving the air thick with silence. The headlights lingered for a long, tense moment, then flicked off. The night swallowed the sound. He stared at the closed hatch, glinting faintly under the moonlight, and a slow dread settled in his gut. He had uncovered something buried, not just by time, but by intent. Whatever Project Terradepth was, it wasn't meant to be found. And as he turned toward his tractor, every instinct told him one thing. He'd just dug deeper than he ever should have. The headlights that had lingered at the edge of the paddock did not return, but they stayed with Leo long after the night fell silent. He kept glancing over his shoulder as he shoveled loose dirt back over the hatch, trying to make it look untouched. The dark mass of the destroyed termite mound loomed beside him like a gutted monument, its broken edges still warm from the day's heat. Only the gleam of steel beneath reminded him that the mound had been more than an obstacle. It had been a warning sign built by insects and ignored by men. By the time he climbed back into the excavator, the moon had gone behind clouds, and the paddock felt abandoned in a way the living land never should. He drove home without music, windows cracked, one hand on the wheel, the other holding the old Kodak camera he'd taken from the bunker. The film inside felt like a secret with teeth. In his mind, he walked through the bunker again. The shelves, the labeled crates, the abandoned duty log, the sealed breech chamber door, all of it smelling of metal and time. And the sound of the alarm, that ancient grinding siren, still echoed in him like a warning he'd chosen not to heed. When he stepped into the house, every lamp seemed too bright, too exposed. He closed the blinds and laid the camera, the notebook, and a few loose pages he'd managed to pull from one of the crates on the kitchen table. The pages were mostly brittle paperwork stamped with government seals, forms half-filled, names redacted. One form listed dates and personnel rotations. Another bore the title Project Terradepth Site B Security Directive. The text beneath was mostly smudged, but one sentence survived, underlined twice in fading ink. All findings are to remain sealed until federal clearance issued by primary authority. There was no signature, no date. It made the air feel heavier. He didn't sleep. Every sound in the house seemed amplified, the roof creaking in the wind, the freezer humming, a lone magpie calling past midnight. By 3 o'clock in the morning, he was pacing the kitchen barefoot, staring out the back window. Something about the silence was wrong. The farm was quiet, always had been, but this was a different kind of quiet, an intense silence, like a breath being held. Then he heard it. Slow crunching footsteps on gravel outside. He moved to the back door and flicked off the lights. Someone was near the shed, squinting through the dark. He could just make out vague shapes. Two figures moving with purpose, their footsteps soft but confident. They weren't kids, and they weren't drunk wanderers. One carried a flashlight with a narrow beam, sweeping the ground as if following a trail. The other carried something bulkier, maybe a tool bag, maybe something worse. They weren't talking. They were searching. Leo grabbed the old shotgun that leaned behind the fridge, not loaded with buckshot, but with blank shells he used to scare off foxes from the goats. He stepped quietly onto the back porch and cocked the hammer, letting the metal click echo into the night. The figures froze. He raised the barrel. "You're trespassing," he said loudly, his voice steadier than he felt. "Leave now, or the next sound you hear won't be a warning." The taller figure raised a hand, not in surrender, but as if signaling to the other. Then both turned and moved quickly back toward a parked vehicle at the far fence line. A dark SUV he hadn't heard drive in. They didn't argue or threaten. They simply left as if they had found nothing and lost nothing. The engine started almost without sound, and the car rolled away across the dirt track, lights off. He waited a full minute before lowering the gun. His hands were shaking. Whoever they were, they hadn't tried to steal a tractor, tools, or fuel. They had gone to the shed. They had known exactly where to look. He checked the shed after they left. One of the boxes he'd brought in earlier, the one with shredded government papers, was missing half its contents. A page he remembered setting aside was gone, the one with the list of personnel and rotations from 1957. The only thing left behind was a cigarette but crushed into the dirt floor. The brand was foreign, something he hadn't seen sold locally. Whoever had come wasn't from around here. Worse, they'd been calm, unhurried. They hadn't been afraid of him. By sunrise, he was at Mabel's front gate, knocking until she came out wrapped in a shawl, mug of tea in hand. She took one look at his face and didn't ask whether something was wrong, only what kind of wrong it was. They sat on her porch, and he told her everything about the bunker, the papers, the alarm, the strangers at night. Mabel listened, her expression unreadable. When he finished, She sighed and stared at the gum trees swaying in the morning wind. I told you once, Leo. These grounds were never abandoned. They were only left alone. There's a difference. He asked her what she meant, and she rose slowly, limping inside before returning with a bundle of old newspapers bound in twine. She untied them and spread them on the porch table. Headlines from the 1950s. Government tests approved for rural development. Local land temporarily acquired for strategic use. Concerns raised over unconfirmed tremors. The articles didn't say what was being tested, only that it was in the national interest. One photo showed a row of men in work overalls standing before a fenced military compound. Not soldiers, but local laborers hired for something they couldn't talk about. Two of the men in the photo weren't smiling. One of them, Leo realized, was his grandfather. Mabel pointed to a line in small print beneath one article. Evacuation scheduled pending conclusion of Phase 3. She tapped the paper. But there was never a Phase 4 printed, just silence. That's what spooked the old families. Your father used to say some things get buried twice. Once by soil and once by signatures. Leo took the papers, but his eyes stayed on the photo. If the bunker belonged to the same project, then the land he thought had always been theirs wasn't really theirs at all. Not legally, not historically. And if the government had once claimed it, maybe they never fully let go. The thought tightened around him like a wire. After leaving Mabel's, Leo returned home with a decision forming. He needed someone outside the farm, someone who could verify what he'd found, someone who wasn't frightened by old warnings and missing paperwork. And so by late afternoon, he drove into town and parked beside the only place that might still care about truth. The Stanthorpe Gazette, a small, stubborn newspaper kept alive mostly by local farming ads and the persistence of one underpaid journalist, Tom Carrion. Tom didn't believe a word of it at first. He was young, too brisk, too caffeinated, the kind of man who thought conspiracy theories were just unpaid fiction. But when Leo placed the film, the notebook, and one of the classified forms on the table between them, Tom's laughter stopped. He ran a finger along the faded stamp. Classified material. Commonwealth authorization required. Then he noticed the date. 1958, Cold War-era rural testing sites. I've heard rumors, but never seen paperwork. Tom murmured, now fully awake. If this is real, you've just opened a door no one wanted touched. Leo said nothing, only nodded. Tom scratched his jaw. You understand what digging into this means. If this was a government site and someone's still protecting it, you're not just dealing with history. You're dealing with people who don't want to be found. Leo stared at him, unmoving. They already came to my property last night. That was enough. Tom closed the office blinds and pulled out his laptop. All right, we make a plan. Copies of everything, digital backups, multiple outlets. Nothing goes public until we're ready to drop it all at once. You don't show one card. You show the whole deck. For the first time since the mound collapsed, Leo felt something like clarity. He and Tom agreed to reconvene in 2 days. By then, Leo would bring the rest of the documents and film from the bunker. They shook hands, and Tom promised silence until they had a full picture. Leo drove home at dusk, the plan in his mind. He felt the weight of risk, but also a slow, burning resolve. If someone wanted him frightened, he had already passed that point. Fear had turned into something sharper, something like defiance. He went back to the bunker that night, just before full dark. The hatch opened smoothly now, the hinges loosened by recent movement. The air below was cold, the stale kind of cold that didn't belong to living things. He descended again, clutching a duffel bag, flashlight swinging. He moved through the entry chamber, past the stacked crates and peeling paint until he stood before the sealed door labeled breach chamber. He pressed his hand against the metal and felt no warmth at all. Whatever lay behind that door had been untouched for more than 60 years. It might never have been meant to open again. He turned toward a cabinet near the fuse box, noticing something he hadn't before. A slim compartment built into the wall. The door stuck at first, then peeled open with a dry scrape. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a thin reel of magnetic tape. Beside it, a rusted portable recorder. He brushed off the dust and saw a label written in pencil. Testimony, S.H. He didn't know who S.H. was, but he knew what a confession sounded like. He placed the reel carefully into the bag and reached for the last document he could find. An inventory sheet showing crates that had once been checked out, then returned. The final column read, all materials secured, awaiting transfer approval. The approval space was blank. When he climbed out of the bunker again, a strange quiet filled the paddock. No wind, no insects, just a waiting stillness. He backed away slowly, latched the hatch, and was halfway to his house when he saw it. Tire tracks in the dirt that hadn't been there earlier. Not the tracks from last night. New ones, wider. He knelt and touched the tread. Someone had come back while he was underground. That was when he decided he could no longer keep the remaining evidence at home. He needed a hiding place no one would search. Not a safe, not a barn, not even inside the house. Something that would look like nature, not storage. And as he stared back toward the broken mound, an impossible idea formed. Termites built where the ground was stable. Termites built what lasted. And termites had unknowingly guarded a secret bunker for 70 years. Maybe they could guard another secret. Now he stood alone beneath the first stars, the bag of evidence heavy at his side. The farm around him no longer a place of quiet work, but a battlefield he hadn't chosen. Somewhere past the tree line, an engine turned over, then faded into the night. Leo didn't move. He just listened, realizing something he didn't want to admit. Whoever was watching him wasn't finished yet, and they weren't afraid of the dark. He was, but not enough to walk away. The next morning arrived without grace, dragging itself over the horizon like a weight Leo didn't remember placing on the world. He hadn't slept. The tire tracks in the dirt outside the bunker entrance were the kind that didn't fade from the mind. They said two things clearly. Someone else knew the hatch existed, and they were confident enough to come back in daylight. Leo stood at the porch window, nursing a bitter cup of coffee, watching the paddock the way a man watches a stranger who knows his name. He spent the early hours gathering everything he had removed from the bunker and laying it out on the dining table. The notebook, the stamped papers, the inventory sheet, the oilcloth-wrapped reel of tape, the camera and its undeveloped film, a few pages with redacted text and signatures erased to black bars. All of it was the same color of age, yellowed, brittle, and irreplaceable. The more he looked at it, the more he realized how reckless he'd been. He had simply pulled these things out and carried them home like a child collecting fossils without thinking what they represented. Not evidence, not history, leverage, and the kind of leverage people were willing to erase a man for. Just before noon, a knock came at the door. Not pounding, controlled, rehearsed. Leo froze, instinct tightening his chest. He grabbed the shotgun again, the same way he had the night before, and eased the curtain back. Two men stood on the step. They wore plain clothes, not uniforms, but the same stillness in their posture betrayed training. One held a clipboard, the other a small metal case. They looked like men who had introduced themselves many times before, in many places no one remembered. He opened the door halfway, the gun still out of sight. "Mr. Hargreaves," the man with the clipboard asked, voice cordial in the way a scalpel is smooth. "That's right. I'm David Cole. This is Mr. Linton. We're with the Environmental Risk and Site Safety Commission. We received a report of hazardous excavation activity on your property. We'd like to assess any potential contamination and review what was removed from the affected area." Leo studied their faces. Neither man blinked. Their shoes were polished, even on a dirt road. Their shirts had no dust on them. He didn't believe the agency name, not because it sounded fake, but because it sounded too official, too polished, the kind you printed on a temporary badge. "Funny," Leo said, leaning against the door. "I don't recall reporting anything, and I sure don't remember asking for a visit." Cole smiled without warmth. "We understand that you may not have been aware of the reporting requirements. Some materials buried in rural properties can be hazardous after long-term exposure. That's why we're here. If you'll just let us take a look at what you found, we can ensure there's no threat to anyone's safety." "And what if I say no?" "Then we'll be forced to escalate the matter to federal jurisdiction," Cole answered, still smiling. "Which means you'll lose access to the land until an enforced inspection is completed. Entirely standard process, but we wanted to offer the courtesy of voluntary cooperation first." There it was. The language of bureaucracy sharpened into a blade. Leo let the silence stretch just long enough to show he understood what they were really saying. "Give us what you found before we take it anyway." "I'll think about it," Leo said. "You can leave your card." Cole reached into his jacket and set a card on the porch railing. It bore no seal, only a number and a name typed in sterile font. Then the men turned and walked back to their unmarked SUV. They didn't argue or threaten. They didn't ask again. Their confidence wasn't the bluster of men trying to intimidate. It was the assurance of men who already believed they would win. Leo shut the door, locked it, and stood still. That was the moment it became absolutely clear. This was not a situation he could solve by waiting. Silence didn't equal safety. It equaled disappearance. He moved fast. He gathered every document, every page, the tape reel, the camera, and brought them to the old workshop behind the house. There he set up the small flatbed scanner he used for invoices. Page by page, he copied everything. He saved digital versions onto a flash drive, then onto a second one, then onto his old laptop. He printed sets of copies and hid them in separate places. One set in the tack room under a saddle blanket. Another taped inside the insulation panel beneath the sink. The last set he placed in an envelope and addressed to Mabel, leaving only 2 words on the front. In case. Then he opened the box containing the reel-to-reel recorder he'd found in the bunker. The machine was old but functional enough. He threaded the tape through the metal guides, wound it across the spool, and flipped the power switch. The motor stuttered, then steadied. A hiss filled the room like breathing through a mask. Then a man's voice emerged low and strained as if spoken through the weight of years. My name is Samuel Hargreaves, the voice said. Leo froze, breath caught in his throat. Hargreaves, his family name, his grandfather's first name. I was assigned to Project Terradepth in 1956. I am recording this without authorization. If you are hearing this, it means the project was either exposed or abandoned without a record of what happened, and someone needs to know the truth. The tape crackled, the voice wavered, but the words bled through. The experiment wasn't supposed to be dangerous at first. We were told it was geological reinforcement testing vibrational stress on mineral layers. That was the cover. But deeper drilling revealed something they didn't expect. There were voids down there, hollow chambers beneath the limestone shelf. We triggered collapses we weren't prepared to contain. They said they'd compensate the families. Most never saw a cent. The only ones who stayed silent were the ones who still believed the Commonwealth meant well. A pause, a breath, a wait. If they shut this place down, it wasn't because they finished. It was because they failed and they didn't want the public to know. They buried the land and erased the personnel lists, but they kept the authority to reclaim it. They never let go. The tape clicked softly, then fell to static. Leo felt his knees weaken. His grandfather hadn't just been involved. He had tried to expose the truth. And whatever he knew, whatever went wrong had been sealed away with him. He sat there a long time, the machine still spinning, the voice still echoing. He thought of his father's warning written on the back of the photograph. Don't dig deeper than you need to. Maybe that wasn't about soil. Maybe it was about the past. Before dusk, he drove to town again, but not to the newspaper. He went to the post office and mailed the envelope addressed to Mabel. Then he went to Tom's office and laid the flash drive on the desk. We can't wait 2 days anymore, Leo said. They've already been to the property. They want the documents back, and when they can't get the documents, they'll settle for removing the person who has them. Tom swallowed hard, the easy confidence gone from his face. All right, then we go public. Full release, multi-outlet drop, and everything goes to a digital dead man switch. If anything happens to you or me, this whole story detonates. Leo nodded. They shook hands, but this time the gesture felt less like a plan and more like a pact. When he returned home, night was falling. He parked near the shed and carried only the original tape reel inside, the one thing he hadn't yet duplicated. He set it on the workbench and stepped outside to breathe. The breeze was warm, the sky swollen with stars. He let himself think just for a moment that maybe he had done enough to stay ahead of this. Then he saw the glow. Not moonlight, fire. Smoke curled out from the far side of the shed, the one where he kept old machinery and the copies of the first documents. The flames were small at first, just licking the timber. Then they leaped higher as if fed. Someone had poured accelerant. Leo sprinted toward it, grabbing the hose reel from the tank, but the fire had already found the straw bales stacked inside. He smothered what he could, but the heat drove him back. Through the flicker, he saw the saddles, the tools, the crates, everything turning to smoke. Whoever had set the fire hadn't wanted to destroy the farm, just the evidence. The message was merciless and clear. We can reach you. We can erase anything you think is safe. He backed away, coughing, eyes burning. And as the flames raged, he noticed something in the dirt near the door. Fresh footprints, boot prints, and beside them, a small plastic cap from a gasoline can. They hadn't bothered to hide their work. They wanted him to know they were done being subtle. He returned to the house, chest tight, grabbed the last remaining set of originals, sealed them inside a watertight bag, and walked out to the edge of the paddock where the remains of the Termite city still lay in ruins. And there, next to the jagged earth where the first mound had fallen, he saw a smaller, newer mound, not yet hardened, its clay still soft and wet from the humid night. Termites had already begun rebuilding. He knelt, dug into the base of the mound, created a hollow pocket, and placed the sealed bag inside. Then he covered it carefully, smoothing the red clay until it looked like nothing more than an unfinished insect fortress. Termites, he thought, were better vaults than locks. When he stood, the fire behind him had died down into smoke and ruin. The night stretched wide and hollow, the kind of night that didn't care whether a man lived or vanished. And as Leo walked back toward the house covered in ash, sweat, and the dirt of secrets too old to stay buried, he understood something new. He was done reacting. The next move would be his. But he would not be the only one forced to answer for what was buried under the clay. They wanted silence. He was going to give them noise. The fire smoldered through most of the night, sending smoke into the sky like a distress signal no one answered. By morning, the shed was nothing but blackened ribs of timber and twisted metal. The insurance company would call it an accident. The police, if they even bothered to drive out this far, would call it vandalism. But Leo knew better. A shed fire was never just a shed fire. When it happened the same night, two men in clean shoes asked politely for what you refused to give them. He stood in the ash with a shovel, turning over charred fragments of paper, watching each one crumble into nothing. The fire had done its job perfectly. The documents stored there, everything not already scanned or mailed, had been reduced to dust. Someone had timed the destruction to send a message. We can burn what you keep. We can burn what you touch. But they hadn't gotten everything. The watertight bag hidden inside the fresh termite mound still sat buried beneath the living clay. The termites worked quietly through the morning, sealing it inside the colony, as if they had been hired for the task. Leo watched them from a distance, the mound not yet tall enough to draw attention, but growing. He had chosen the one thing on the property no one would search. Not the house, not the barn, not a safe, but a living structure too ordinary to question. Termites had hidden one secret for 70 years. They could hide another. By noon, neighbors began arriving. Some had seen the smoke from the highway. Others had heard the sirens or the rumors already spreading through town. They asked if he was all right, if anyone had been hurt, if the fire had spread. Leo gave the same answer to all of them. I'm fine, but this wasn't an accident. Some nodded with sympathy. Others lowered their eyes as if unsure whether standing too close to him might put them in a blast radius. One man, a beef rancher named Keller, stepped close and spoke under his breath. You stir up something buried too long. Sometimes it fights back. Seen it before with mining claims. Best thing you can do is walk away. I don't walk away, Leo said. The rancher shrugged as if that decision deserved respect and pity. By late afternoon, the damage had been assessed, and the adrenaline had worn into a bone-deep exhaustion. Leo sat on the porch steps with a bottle of water, staring at the scorched earth and thinking of the voice on the tape, the voice of his grandfather, warning a future he would never live to see. It wasn't just his land anymore. It hadn't been just his family's land for decades. It was a story someone had tried to bury alive. And now that the story was waking, the people who buried it were waking, too. The next blow came in the form of a letter. A courier van rolled up the driveway, the uniformed driver polite and expressionless. He asked for Leo's signature, handed him a thick envelope stamped with a federal seal, then drove off without another word. Inside was a notice of injunction. The language was dense, legal, and merciless. The land surrounding the excavation site was now under temporary federal claim, pending investigation of potential geological instability and hazardous material exposure. Leo was barred from entering the affected zone unless supervised. Any interference or additional digging would be considered obstruction of a federal assessment. And until the investigation was complete, his farm accounts, including the subsidy payment he had been counting on to survive, were frozen. No threats in handwriting now. No men in shadows. This time the attack came on paper in clean Helvetica signed by someone in an office in Canberra who never had to look a farmer in the eye. They weren't burning buildings anymore. They were burning the ground under his feet. Leo took the envelope to Mabel's. She read it twice, glasses low on her nose, then set it on the table like something contaminated. "They aren't just trying to scare you," she said quietly. "They're squeezing your oxygen. Burn what you have, then take what you need to live. That's not a warning. That's preparation." "And you?" Leo asked. "Still think I should have walked away when I had the chance." Mabel didn't answer. She went into the other room and returned with a stack of folded papers, old maps, dated ledgers, photocopies of records long erased from government archives. She placed them in front of him. "Your family wasn't the only one who lost someone to that project," she said. "But you might be the only one stubborn enough to finish what they couldn't." She didn't have to say what she meant. He already knew. The next step was the courthouse. Tom met him outside the small regional courthouse the following day. A folder under his arm and a look in his eye somewhere between exhaustion and adrenaline. They sat on a bench under a jacaranda tree, its purple blossoms blowing around them like confetti for a ceremony no one wanted to celebrate. "You're not just dealing with a land dispute anymore." Tom said this is bigger. They didn't file that injunction through local jurisdiction. They escalated to federal property law. That means someone high up got nervous and decided to pull the emergency brake. And what do? We don't fight small. We go loud. Tom handed him a phone. On screen was a drafted press release scheduled for distribution to multiple outlets simultaneously. Not a teaser story, not a human interest piece. A full expose, government project, missing workers, illegal land retention, sealed bunker, evidence withheld, tape recording, everything. "If we publish this," Tom said, "you don't get to take it back. You don't sleep again without wondering who's watching the fence line. You don't go into town without people choosing sides, but you do make it impossible for them to bury you quietly. You become visible, and visible is safer than silent." Leo nodded slowly. "When?" "Noon tomorrow," Tom said. "That gives us time to finalize legal clearance. Once it launches, we move everything into public record. They can't erase the truth. Once it's everywhere." Leo didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket and placed a flash drive next to the folder on Tom's lap. "The originals are hidden," he said. "If anything happens, there's a second package waiting for release." Tom stared, understanding the weight of what that meant. "Then we're committed." On the drive home, Leo kept replaying the same thought. Tomorrow, the fight stops being private. Tomorrow, the secret becomes a story. But he also knew something else. Secrets don't surrender. They retaliate. That night, the retaliation arrived. He noticed Mabel's house was dark when he drove past. Her porch light unlit, curtains drawn. He tried calling. No answer. He tried knocking. No sound. Her car was in the drive, but her back door was ajar. Inside, one chair was knocked over. A framed photograph cracked on the floor, and her teacup lay shattered beside the table. There was no blood, no note, no struggle beyond the single overturned chair. But the silence was violent. They had taken her not to kill her, not yet, but to send a message the fire hadn't been enough to deliver. "You are not the only one who can be removed." Leo stood in her kitchen, pulse hammering, jaw clenched. For a long time, he said nothing. Didn't move, didn't breathe. When he finally stepped outside, the wind had risen, rattling the screen door like a warning. He looked toward the road, toward the empty distance, where dust still hung faintly in the air. Whoever had come for her had only just left. He stared into the dark and felt the final pieces of hesitation burn away. They wanted him quiet. They were about to hear him loud. And if they thought the truth was dangerous buried, they had no idea how dangerous it would be once it started to breathe. Tomorrow was no longer just the day the story broke. It was the day he stopped being hunted and started hunting back. The courthouse was already surrounded by cameras when Leo arrived. The next morning. Yet, it didn't feel like victory waiting to happen. It felt like an ambush disguised as due process. News vans lined the street. Men in sunglasses leaned against unmarked cars pretending to check their phones, and a cluster of local residents hovered near the steps, half curious, half afraid to be seen standing too close to him. The sky was clear, but the air carried the storm weight of consequences. Tom was waiting near the entrance, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, as if he'd been talking since dawn. His eyes had the sleepless look of a man who'd seen the worst parts of the story too late to walk away from it. When Leo reached him, Tom didn't offer pleasantries. He simply said, "Everything's set. Noon drop, multiple outlets, 3 offshore backups. Even if the government freezes every server in the region, the data will still publish." Leo nodded, though his mind wasn't on publication. It was on Mabel's empty house, the broken teacup, and the unanswered questions echoing in every unswept corner. If they had taken her to silence him, they had failed. If they had taken her to warn him, they had miscalculated. The only question left was how much louder the truth needed to get before the people trying to bury it realized it was already too late. Inside the courthouse, the walls smelled of paper and polish, the kind of smell that pretended laws were stronger than men. The courtroom itself was modest, a square space with too many shadows for its number of windows. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair tied tight, sat high above the proceedings, as if distance could protect her from implication. On one side of the room, the 2 government representatives, Cole and Linton, sat stiff and entirely unbothered, as though they had already prepared a version of the future in which none of this mattered. On the other side, Leo took his seat beside the attorney Tom had arranged, a woman named Clara Singh, who spoke in calm, measured precision, the verbal equivalent of a scalpel. The opposing counsel opened immediately with motions to seal the hearing under national security privilege. "This matter pertains to restricted federal property," the attorney declared. "The court is obligated to maintain confidentiality and suspend public access." Clara rose, her voice smooth but edged. "Your Honor, the property in question is not federally owned. The original requisition was temporary and predicated on the completion of Project Terra Depth. There is no federal deed, no authorization for renewal, and no documentation confirming the project was ever closed. Therefore, according to archived land statutes, ownership legally reverted to the family." My client Cole leaned toward his attorney and whispered something, his expression tightening. The government attorney responded, "We are prepared to present sealed documents confirming federal continuation beyond the stated deadline." Clara's response was almost gentle. "If those documents exist, Your Honor, then the federal government has just admitted to maintaining a covert operation on private land for more than 60 years without the knowledge of the owner, the district, or parliament. In which case, this is no longer a land hearing. It is a constitutional one, and we would like the press to remain present." A murmur rippled across the room. Even the judge hesitated, weighing not the law, but the fallout. "Until proof is presented," the judge said, "this hearing remains open." And that was the moment Tom pressed send. At exactly noon, the first notification appeared on phones in the courtroom. Then the next, a buzz, then another. Screens lit up like an electrical wave as the headline spread faster than anyone could smother it. The Buried Project. Secret military site found on Queensland farm. Records. Photos. Testimony released photos of the bunker. Scans of the stamped documents. Audio transcripts from Samuel Hargreaves. Images from the camera film. And most damning of all, names of government officials whose signatures appeared in the site ledger, names still sitting in Parliament committees today. Reporters began standing. Some spoke into microphones, others typed. The story was no longer local. It was national, and it was live. The government attorney demanded an immediate injunction against media distribution. The judge refused. "You cannot restrain what is already public record," she said. "Your motion is denied." For the first time, Cole's confidence broke. His jaw moved, but no words came out. Then a second message came, not for the reporters, not for the public, but to Leo's phone alone. It was from an unknown number. "We still have her." A pulse of cold went through him. But the moment he read the next word, something shifted. Alive. What followed were coordinates. A location on the outskirts of town, near an old pump house that had been abandoned since the drought years. They weren't threatening him anymore. They were negotiating. His attorney saw the change in his face. "Are you all right?" Leo nodded once. "I need 5 minutes." He stepped out of the courtroom just long enough to call Tom. "They have Mabel," he said. "I'm going to get her." "Not alone," Tom insisted. "I'll get the police." "You saw what the police did when I reported the shed," Leo said quietly. "They didn't show up. Someone else did." Tom didn't argue again. He only said, "Then I'm coming with you." Leo didn't say yes, but he also didn't say no. They drove fast. The abandoned pump house stood crooked against a backdrop of grasslands and rust. The building's door was open, hanging loosely, darkness inside thick enough to feel. Leo entered first, his steps quiet. The smell of damp concrete filled the air. Then he saw her. Mabel was tied to a chair, but she was conscious, her eyes alert rather than afraid. A bruise sat above her temple, but she was alive. Leo rushed to her, untying the ropes. "You all right?" he whispered. She gave a faint smile. "Told you once, boy. Ground remembers more than people do." Before he could reply, voices sounded at the doorway. Two figures stepped in, Cole and Linton. No longer pretending to wear titles, no clipboards, no polite faces, only the cold certainty of men whose plans had just broken in public. "You've shown remarkable persistence," Cole said. "It's unfortunate you didn't use it more quietly. And it's unfortunate you thought secrecy was a stronger wall than truth," Leo answered. Cole exhaled, not angry, resigned. "It won't matter. The government will absorb this. A week from now, the headlines will change. A month from now, no one will remember." Tom appeared behind Leo, camera in hand, the red recording light visible. "Already live streaming," he said, voice steady. "Might want to check your posture." Cole turned, expression fracturing. "Turn it off." "No," Tom replied. "You've had 60 years of silence. Your turn's over." Linton reached into his jacket, but before he could draw what he had concealed there, police vehicles arrived outside. Real police this time, not the ones who'd pretended not to hear Leo's calls. Someone in the courthouse or the press gallery had tipped them off. Whether out of duty or panic didn't matter. Cole and Linton were taken into custody. Not for conspiracy, not for kidnapping, not for 60 years of buried truth. For now, only obstruction, trespass, unlawful detention. But the real charges would come later once the investigation unfolded and the signatures in those logs started matching government archives. By sunset, Mabel was home. She sat in her kitchen again, tea steeping as though she had never left. The bruise darkened, but her spirit didn't. When Leo apologized for dragging her into danger, she said only, "You didn't drag me. I stayed. There's a difference." The following week brought rulings. The injunction on the land was lifted. The property was declared legally restored to the Hargreaves estate, pending full audit of past violations. The federal government announced an internal review of terra depth and issued a public statement acknowledging the existence of historical research infrastructure whose records had not been previously reconciled. It was careful language, half admission and half shield. But it was the first time the project had been acknowledged outside classified archives. Leo didn't celebrate. Instead, he returned to the paddock. The termite mound he had chosen as a vault was already taller, a reddish cathedral growing cell by cell, its surface drying into the familiar ridged fortress the insects had mastered over centuries. Beneath it, hidden in the clay like a fossil sealed in amber, were the untouched originals of the documents that had ignited the fire. He didn't dig them up. He only placed a marker beside the mound, a simple post of reclaimed timber, engraved not with a memorial, but a promise. This land remembers. 2 days later, Leo received a final envelope in the mail. No return name, no address. Inside was a single handwritten note, and beneath it, a metal key tagged with an alphanumeric code. The note read, "If you want to understand how far the project went, don't look at Site B. Look for Site C. Coordinates enclosed in the file you haven't opened yet. The story isn't finished." He flipped the key in his hand, watching sunlight catch its steel surface. It seemed the past had more than one hatch waiting, but that was a battle for another season. For now, the land was quiet. The farm was still his, and what had been buried was no longer silent. The truth was out, and unlike metal or secrets or soil, the truth did not rust. Hit subscribe so you never miss the next chapter of unbelievable real-life mysteries and shocking discoveries. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like. It really helps the channel grow. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in this situation? I read every reply. Turn on notifications. Trust me, you'll want to know what drops next. Don't stop here. Tap one of the videos on your screen. YouTube already knows what you'll love next. Watch the next episode and dive deeper into stories they tried to bury.